We've looked at a lot of special angles and have been able to determine the sine and cosine. But if an angle is not a special angle, then you want to be able to use a calculator. So let's take a look at that. For non-special angles, to find the cosine and the sine of angles other than the special angles, a calculator should be used to approximate a value. Now, the steps to do this will depend on the type of calculator that you use. Examples of calculators, this is a TI-84. This is just an example. There are other graphing calculators, other TIs certainly, but the steps would be similar. You can also use Desmos, which is a free online calculator. A lot of people like this because it's free. It will really just depend on what instructions that you have. Whichever one you decide to use though, whichever calculator you use, you have to make sure that you're in the appropriate mode. You can see on this Desmos screen that if I were to type something in right now, that answer would only be in degrees. So for example, if I wanted to know, say, the cosine of pi over 4, and I typed this in, I'm going to have to switch that mode to radians, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. So let's look at this example. Use a calculator to find the approximate value of each expression rounded to 2 decimal places. Now, I want to show you using the handheld Texas Instruments TI-84, and I also want to show you using Desmos. So A says to find the cosine of 72 degrees. B says to find the cosine of 72. Now, because there's no degree unit on part B, then that 72 represents radians. All right, now think about 72 radians. You don't have to know exactly where that's at, but you might be thinking, let's just have a visual of this. If we go all the way around a circle, we know that's 2 pi. Well, 2 pi is approximately 6.28. So if we go around again, right now we're at about 12.56. What 72 represents is going around and around and around until you finally get to around 72. Okay, so that's just like a little bit of a visual. And 72 degrees, of course, is not even a whole revolution, right? That's just going to be somewhere up in this first quadrant. Okay, so they are definitely not the same. So let's look at cosine of 72 degrees. So first thing I'm going to do is notice that I am set in degrees. So I'm going to do the cosine of 72, just typing those in, and bam, I've got an answer, 0.309. If I want to know that same thing in radians, then I'm going to go to mode and change it to radians, and it tells me that on the screen. I'm going to retype the cosine of 72, and I hit enter. Okay, very different answer. Now they look the same, but they're not the same. And I would say that they look the same because they both say cosine of 72, which you have to remember is what we saw on the screen when we typed those in. Right now we see radians, but when we started, you might want to rewind this video, we saw degrees. Okay, now let's take a look at Desmos. Desmos has degrees right down there at the bottom, so I'm going to type in cosine of 72, and bam, there's the answer, 0.309. We saw that before. All that I have to do, I don't have to retype it, all I have to do is just click on that little slider and it switches. Now I suppose the disadvantage to that is that I can't see the original answer in degrees, but it's also much faster because I don't have to type it in. Whichever calculator you decide to use, make sure that you learn the steps and that you don't take anything for granted that you know. Practice is always the key.